What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and let's go ahead and talk about the version 1.2 update for Automobilista 2 and the Racin USA DLC Part 1 DLC launched alongside. Now, in the interest of disclosure, I've been playing on the beta version of the game that's been available to people testing out the game and all that stuff. It's really just like one or two minor little patches ahead at this little point right now, but just something that I want to throw out there just so that way maybe there's something that looks different than on your end. So let's go ahead and start off with the patch. First of all, everyone gets a brand spanking new, shiny BMW M4 GT4, so that's pretty sweet. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this car because I find it simultaneously to be an absolute tank of a car, but not enough of a tank to be fun because it's a tank. But at the very least, having another car out there in the GT4 class isn't a bad thing, and I'm sure some people will like it. Although I did find it was very slippery at corner exit, like 7/8 of the way through the corner, just like, oh hey, the rear end's stepping out now. Now for the more substantial changes in the version 1.2 update. First of all, the shadow system has been updated and honestly looks much better. No more of that weird rolling unshadow area off in the distance and a lot less aliasing on them. It just generally looks better, it looks smoother. Performance-wise, can't really comment on that. They say that there should be a performance hit, but it looks so much better anyways that a performance hit would not be something that I would have too much of a problem with. This is easily my favorite part of the update itself because while the engine has always been very impressive in terms of lighting and graphical fidelity, shadow quality itself has always been an issue with the Madness engine, and this is a step towards addressing that. Along the same lines, a small handful of tracks have now been updated with seasonal textures, which is really cool. This is one of those things that Project Cars 2 attempted to do and did do, but it never really necessarily amounted to all that much. In some instances, I remember distinctly being disappointed with Sonoma because it never became green in that game, no matter what season you set it to, which is disappointing. But I am pleased to say Bathurst is one of the tracks that they added seasonal textures to, and you can make Bathurst turn green. If you do a race with the month set to like July, is what I did in my testing, yeah, it's green. It looks entirely different, and it's so cool to actually see. Usually with Bathurst, you know, you see dead looking grass, you know, it's the yellow, greenish, brownish, you know, it's got that color palette to it because, you know, Australia is a very hot place, you know, presumably probably don't get a lot of rain down there in the middle of the summer, but then when you change the season, like, it looks entirely different. It's just, yeah. This is one of those things I have to mention because it's so nifty, even though it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's cool to see they're utilizing that feature of the engine. And the last thing I'm going to touch on in terms of the version 1.2 update itself, and probably the most important thing for a lot of you guys out there, is tire updates. A smattering of cars have had revisions to their tires in terms of tread and dimensions and things like that. As I've really kind of been away from sim racing over the last few months, I'm not really going to comment too terribly much on it other than it feels largely the same as what I remember this game feeling like, so I don't feel like it's a particularly huge change. But I've seen some people on the forums that are saying that this is entirely different, and then I've seen people that are saying it's the same. I honestly don't know what to make of it. Your mileage may vary, test it yourself, do your own due diligence, right? Now, of course, there are a bunch of other changes in this substantial update, but as I'm confident you guys can all read a changelog, if you would like all of the details, you can find that down in the description. And now for the Racin USA DLC Part 1. This DLC features 3 tracks: the Daytona Road Course, Laguna Seca, and the glorious Long Beach. Alongside the 3 tracks, you get 4 cars in 2 classes: the Cadillac Dpi, and then 3 GTE or GTLM cars: Corvette C8r, the Porsche 911 RSR, and the BMW M8, the big boy. As the circuits are all pretty straightforward, they are what they are, let's go ahead and talk about the cars. All 3 GTE cars drive distinctly differently, so it's a matter of pick your poison. The M8 is the boring couch of a car in this pack. It's straightforward, simple, sounds boring, looks boring. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I have a problem with the car in terms of how it's made in game, but this one is just bland. It's definitely the most beginner friendly and easiest to drive of the bunch, so it's got that appeal. But at the end of the day, as I find it, it is basically the white bread toast of the race car world. Then there is the Corvette C8r, which is the middle ground of the pack in the GTE GTLM class, and perhaps the overall best in terms of well-rounded, balanced performance. It's relatively easy to drive, not as easy as the M8, but definitely not as hard as the Porsche. It does everything reasonably well. It's just a very well-balanced overall quality car. My biggest complaint would be that the audio sounds on this thing are just kind of a little weird. Like, the engine doesn't really change over the course of the rev range, and the rev limiter, it just doesn't like kick in. I don't really ever hear it, so I find I have to actually kind of like look actively at the shift lights to pay attention to the revs, but I think that's just something where with more time with the car, just kind of get more used to it. But really no complaints here. This is just kind of a solid all-around good choice type car. And then we come to the RSR, which I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more, because if you can't tell by the sound of my voice, I'm excited, because this thing has become my go-to car within the GTE class that now exists within Automobilista 2, as well as one of my go-to cars within Automobilista 2. In terms of where it fits in the class, it's easily the most difficult of the bunch to drive, owing to its shorter wheelbase and the weight distribution, even if it is mid-engine. But, you know, it's an entirely different thing to the other cars, which are comparatively more stable and straightforward. But at the same time, the way you can get this car into the corner, the way you can work with the brakes and, you know, get the car to rotate and dance, it's just a totally different experience than the other cars, and I love the way this thing drives. And then there's also the fact that in terms of sounds, generally I don't have too many positive things to say about Racin Studios and their audio work, because it's just never been an area where I felt like they've been particularly great. It's always been a weak spot for their titles. But this car, largely owing to the fact that it is one of the greatest sounding cars that exists in all of racing right now, it sounds fantastic. It's got that 4-liter flat six screaming its head off thing going on, and like you can't go wrong with that. So yeah, honestly, everything about this car is just a blast. Maybe some people might say that this car is just not composed enough, or it's kind of a little skatey, it's a little all over the place and kind of hard to drive. But personally, I like the way this car drives, because it is an active car and you do get to wheel it a bit more, especially compared to like the BMW, which is just kind of smooth and safe. But literally, this car just... this car rocks my socks. And then we come to the Cadillac Dpi. This would have to be my second favorite car in the pack after the RSR, just because of the way it drives. It also kind of has that similarly, you know, edgy, knifey feel action going on, which some people might not be a fan of. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But it's one of those cars that you don't realize how fast it is until you realize how fast it is. And when you start flinging it around, like Long Beach in particular, it is just an absolute blast. And when you get the car dialed in, you can really start to properly hammer on it, as well as, you know, work it around and slide it around a little bit coming out of the corners. And it's a riot. It's a riot. In general, though, I'd say all four of the cars are very well done and stand up favorably compared to all the other cars in Automobilista 2. And in some regards, particularly the audio, I feel like Racin has clearly raised their bar just that little bit further. And one thing I do want to mention, it's not specific to any of the cars in this DLC package by any means, but just Automobilista 2 in general. The default setups, in my opinion, strike me more as default settings rather than default setups. In general, I find across the board in Automobilista 2, the cars are all kind of pretty edgy and lacking for rear grip. That just seems to be a general thing, you know, across the board more or less. But when you go ahead and go into the setup page and work to rectify that issue, you can pretty easily start to make really good progress towards fixing that. You know, for example, the RSR and the DPI, you know, I mentioned as cars that are particularly edgy in this package. You know, you go ahead and take some spring rate out, you work on the dampers a little bit, you soften up the anti-roll bars, you just make the car softer in general. You're not going to turn those cars into just absolute mushy directionless turds, or alternatively end up with just terminal understeer that you can't do anything about. Like, don't feel afraid to go into the garage page and work on the handling issues that you're having at hand, because you really need to with Automobilista 2 for better and for worse. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here on a more positive note, as well as kind of give you a real impression as to what I think here about this DLC package, beyond just, the cars are good, the tracks, got 3 good tracks, yada yada yada. But follow me here. Hopefully this makes sense. I apologize, it's probably going to be more long-winded than it needs to be, because unfortunately that's just the way I do things. I am self-aware. But every racing sim out there has an experience where it plants its flag, it makes its claim to fame. It's the essential experience. Assetto Corsa has the Nürburgring track day experience, which only works there, and it only could work there in the environment, sim racing environment as it is today. ACC in today's world is uncompromising about just GT3 cars, which is absolutely backwards from the way every other racing sim on the market has gone for the last 15 years. We're gonna do just this is backwards, and that's got its own appeal to it. iRacing, I'll flat out say, if you haven't driven the Skip Barber and done races in the Skip Barber, you haven't really actually iRaced. It's just part of the thing you have to do, because that's where the pieces of the puzzle fit and where everything comes together, and it's this is what the best experience you're going to get is probably going to be. Now, I can understand why some people are going to disagree with my opinion on this, because there's a very love it or leave it thing at the center of the core here, but this isn't me saying that Daytona and Laguna Seca are tracks that just exist in this DLC and they're just space filler. They're good tracks in their own rights, obviously. There's a reason why Daytona is incredibly popular, to race on a line with the road course and everything, and other racing sims, because it's a fun, straightforward, straight ahead track that everyone can agree is just kind of it's a good track. Laguna Seca, there's a reason why it's become a standard track in the last 25 years of sim racing, because it's just, again, it's just a really good track that everyone kind of agrees, it's a good track. We need that in this game. But Long Beach in this environment. Some people don't like street circuits, and that's why I say I can understand why people would have a disagreement here. But personally, I really enjoy the street circuit that you get with a track like Long Beach. The walls are everywhere. There is no runoff room. It's got a very start-stop nature to it, as opposed to somewhere like Monaco or Adelaide that's in this game as well. You just don't get the same experience with a American-style downtown street circuit as opposed to those other types of environments. And then you add in being a downtown street circuit, the lighting effects and everything, and the stuff that happens when you're racing in the evening and at night. It's just this thing where driving the DPI, the RSR around that track, it's just incredibly engaging, and just you have to be focused all the time, and you have to be on it and paying attention, and you add in the environment and everything, and it's just pulling you deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and it just makes for a tremendous experience that is, in my opinion, the flagship experience of Automobilista 2 and what can possibly be done. It's the thing where if someone asks me what is the best experience, there you go. If you don't enjoy this experience, the game just isn't going to be for you at this stage, and that's all there's going to be to it. So there's really your defining factor, in my opinion. Some people may disagree, but I am that big on Long Beach, and there's a reason why I've constantly over the years, dating back to game stock car, have been the hey, Surfer's Paradise win guy. All right, Riza, Surfer's Paradise win. That's the only way you're going to top this. Full on. The only way it's going to get topped. It's never going to happen. But just, man's got a dream, right? Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. All right, bye.